You're saying, how do you think a civil war or a breakdown of the United States would begin? You have a theory as to that?
Yes. I have multiple.
Now, real quick, sorry. So I just want to make sure I'm clear here. Following the election, you have already said you think there will be 1,000 deaths, politically motivated deaths by April.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And either this will be the effect of or the beginning of what may be a collapse or breakdown?
I think it'll be a war. I think you'll still probably get your groceries. You'll still be able to watch Netflix. Keep in mind, in Syria or Ukraine, the horrible thing is you'll still have to go to your job. You'll still have to pay your bills. You'll still watch Netflix with the kids. It's just Chicago's being shelled.
And I do want you to begin with your scenario, but I want to stress this too. It's a point that I like to make. When I was in Egypt in 2013, across the street from the Hilton was McDonald's.
Yes.
There's a guy sitting down eating a cheeseburger and watching soccer. And 3 blocks away was the revolution.
Yes.
APCs were surrounding. Black Hawks were flying overhead. We got in a car and drove to Heliopolis and went to the mall where everybody was going about their days as if nothing was happening.
Yes.
So with that in mind, people seem to think that a war starting means literally you're in your home and bolts are flying.
Yes.
But explain to me what you think is going to happen in the next couple of months.
So I've studied dozens of different historic crises, and the reason I think we're going to have a war is partly intuitive. You just look outside. But it's also, I've studied almost every single model of the science of history, where people have been trying to develop models to predict history, and about 5 different historic models, most of them dating to the 20th century, say that in the 2020s, America would have a civil war. And I was looking...
This is like Strauss-House generational theory.
So Strauss-Howe, David Hackett Fisher, Peter Turchin, there's a handful of others. There's Goldstein, who's a really terrible author. The ones I pull on the most are Peter Turchin and David Hackett Fisher. They really get into the data computer science level. And there's a handful of, there's like 3 variables that Peter Turchin looked at, where if you look at these variables, and he's used this for over a dozen crises over history, you can predict the years these historic crises happen in. Those are average wages, income inequality, and competition for elite jobs. Those 3 variables were able to predict the fall of the Roman Republic, the English Civil War, the Black Death, the French Wars of Religion, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and so many more.
Wow.
And these crises happen every 250 years like clockwork. The last real version in the Western world was the French Revolution. Before then, the Wars of Religion in the mid-1600s that killed a third of Europe's population. Before then, the Black Death in the 1300s, which killed half of Europe's population. So these are patterns that we have computer models to study. They're very consistent. And so I'm looking to all these historic examples to inform my analysis of what I'm about to say.
So how does it begin?
So I have a tier list of multiple variables. My top one was a financial crisis, and that was going back years. I figured out a lot of this stuff in 2020. And financial crisis was my top bet because you look at the English Civil War, the French Revolution, and the France's previous crises in the 13 and the 1600s, etc. And it's normally caused by a budget issue because leading up to these crises, one of the great books in this topic, The Great Wave by David Hackett Fisher, he found these crises because he was studying the history of inflation, and he found you could correlate the history of inflation with these crises because inflation is a parallel for the government instability. So the government's inflating its currency when it's feeling desperate. So long periods of inflation, which crest. And the top predictors for these crises from the inflation analysis are increase in real estate prices, real estate and food prices, oil prices. And this was stuff I saw in 2020. And I was thinking in 2020, oh, it's great that our real estate's not that bad. It's great that our food prices aren't that bad. And then
now food and I got to tell you, real estate is insane right now.
I know.
There was a house nearby that was like $250 and now it's $500 and it's been 2 years.
And this isn't a super this isn't like Miami or Los Angeles.
We're in West Virginia.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you believe that we will see a financial crisis then in the next few months?
Maybe not the next few months. It wouldn't surprise me next few months. I think because.
I want to try and get to this. You're saying that within the next 3 months or till April. Sorry, so it's not 3 months, it's 5 or 6.
Political crisis. That's what I'm betting on. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. So for these crises, the number one thing is the budget issue. I don't think we're going to face the budget issue. It's still my number 2 probability. So historically, the budget issue is the top one because for all of these crises, the thing that instigated it was the budget crisis, where neither side was willing to let the other side have a concession. And I'm going to use the English Civil War and the French Revolution as an example. In the English Civil War, England was divided between the supporters of the king and the parliament. In all of these underlie certain class and ethnic and regional interests. For us, I say the right versus left is college educated versus non-college educated. And so English Civil War, it was the nobility and the merchants. And so what happened was that they had a huge budget. They couldn't pay their bills at all. And then the royalists tried to get the parliamentarians to give a concession for a foreign war. And then the parliamentarians said no. The king tried to shut down the parliament. French Revolution's almost the exact same thing. The king tried to get the parliament to give a budget consensus. The parliament said no, start of the war. So that was my top predictor, where an example of that for us would be a great example. So for my whole stack of probabilities, my top probability now is election dispute. Then it's budget issue. Then it's foreign war. Trump assassination. I'd move Trump assassination to number 3 now, and then black swan or randomized event. A black swan would be, let's say there's a major riot in Los Angeles that the police don't respond to, and then that becomes a political issue, like what you saw in the UK. And so
we're looking at a political crisis.
And that's probably the second historically. It's normally with the end of a monarchy where there's not someone to replace it. And with these wars, you reach a threshold where people want to kill each other, and they're looking for plausible deniability.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be done in a certain way so that both sides have complete legal plausible deniability to kill the other. The French Revolution is a great example of this because I've been reading up on the topic. De Tocqueville's book on it is amazing. You guys should read it. But the thing I didn't know at the French Revolution until really recently is that it's a multi-year process. So what happened is that you had a political dispute between the parliament and the king. The king shut down the parliament. The parliament says, no, we're not going to do that. Then there's this quiet coup. And the crazy thing with the French Revolution is there's no real violent point it happens. What just happens is the army mutinies. The army says, no, king, you're going to listen to the parliament. And then the peasants start burning down the Lord's land. But it was this gradual, let's say, 3-year process where the monarch lost power. France then became a parliamentary democracy where only the rich could vote, split between the right and the left. The left killed the right. They gave the poor the vote. France then became a military dictatorship.
Yo.
No, it became 3 people. Then it became the Jacobins, who were the radical leftists, who are a social club, took over.
But real quick, it was a series of revolutions, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. And so that's what I think it would be, where my best scenario is that both sides. The reason I say that we're going to have a civil war now is that neither side can afford to not have a civil war. And I'd explain that later. But the right and the left both want a war at this point, and I know that's true because both sides have completely given up on plausible deniability for the other side. They're just pandering to their own people. And most political pundits, a lot of big political pundits have openly pushed for violence at this point. And
But even on the right?
I think, so like the Nick Fuentes types, there are definitely people who would not be against it. And
So I would put it this way. On the left, we have seen extremist rhetoric bubbling up to the highest levels.
Yes.
We have seen the excusing of extreme violence, such as at the Chaz Chop, there were a couple teenagers that were shot. There was another guy who was shot and killed. In Provo, Utah, BLM ran up to a car and just shot a guy for no reason.
Yeah.
Then when you look at what the quote-unquote right has, there's no prominent right-winger advocating for violence or calling for the use of violence or force. At most, Trump he came out and said the death penalty for death penalty for migrants who kill Americans or cops.
Yes.
We do have the lower tier, more fringe elements of the right or anti-left who are absolutely calling for violence, but there's not the leadership faction calling for it.
Yeah. I understand you're not calling for violence, and I hate to be this blunt, but you did put your capital in Harper's Ferry for a reason. It's like a revolutionary center. This is where the American Civil War started. Yeah, you're in Harper's Ferry for a reason.
We're in Harper's Ferry because it's the closest we can get to D.C. without being in a
John
liberal
Brown.
state.
It's John Brown. I mean, that's obvious. That it's,
but do you know the history of Harper's Ferry?
Oh yeah, it was
impossible to defend.
It was a military base that John Brown attacked because he wanted to launch a slave revolt across the South.
It was the Armory.
Yeah.
And during the Civil War, it was captured over and over again because it was impossible to defend.
Yeah.
You could attack it, seize it, and then you couldn't defend it. So the South and the North went back and forth. It is a terrible place to set up any kind of operation.
Yes, it's surrounded on all sides by hills that you can rain artillery down from.
Right. And the reason it exists was because, I can't remember the guy's name, but it was Harper. He had a ferry because that's where the river splits. And so he would ferry people, and then they set up a trade and port in the area. And then John Brown, who I think was a nut job.
Yeah.
He had been going to Kansas and, just killing people with his sons. Went to Harper's Ferry, seized the armory, attempting to start a slave revolt. And then when they stopped a train, he let the train leave. The train immediately made contact at the next stop and said, yo, this guy's taking over the town. You need to send in the troops. And this is, And
this was not the main point I was trying to convey.
I'm just saying Harper's Ferry is a terrible place to be.
Oh, I'm not saying, I never said you're trying to launch a revolt. I'm just saying this place has historic significance.
That I get.
Yes.
I'm just saying, for somebody like myself who talks about the probability of civil war, this is the worst place to go.
Oh, you're not trying to launch a coup. There aren't enough guns here.
I'm not saying you're suggesting that. I'm saying that if we were actually considering,
no, I'm not saying that either.
I'm saying that if we were actually concerned about conflict and wanted to avoid it, we would go.
I'm not saying that. No, I'm saying that this place has a very significant historical significance.
There are signs
symbolism
every 10 feet with the battle history of the Civil War. You drive down the road and there's plaques everywhere telling you about these battles. There's cannons along the road.
What I was trying to say is that picking this location, it shows the political discourse we're at. It shows that we're a society which thinks
I'm just
we're on
saying
the verge.
We didn't pick this location for any political or historic reason. We chose it because it's the eastern panhandle of West Virginia, which keeps us out of the liberal jurisdictions which ban guns, but allows us access to Baltimore and D.C. airports. That's the only reason. Because the first place we built was in Western Maryland. And then our guns were banned, and we were like, okay, let's move over a little bit.
It sounds like Rudyard's alluding more to serendipitous selection because of...
And I'll throw one more at you. We did a show on Friday on the Culture War with these researchers who study weather patterns and geoengineering and things like this. Very much these guys were against the idea that the militaries and governments were controlling weather or anything like that, such that we can cloud seed. Operation Popeye was a real thing, but no one's creating and moving hurricanes. That's insane. However, one gentleman did bring up a very interesting slide that shows there was a correlation between weather patterns over a long period of time and reserve currencies, and that empires collapsed in correlation somehow for some reason along with global weather pattern.
Yeah.
And so, as you were mentioning, the strange cosmology and the strange connections we can't map out, let me break it down this way. I may say something like, we see a reserve currency collapse around the same time there's major storms, and you think that's spiritual hubbub, supernatural nonsense. It's a coincidence. However, there's a really great map that shows voting patterns as influenced by ancient coastlines.
Yeah.
And have you seen this map? In the South, in the United States, where the coastline used to go up to the southern states, into the center of those states, a long strip. Those coasts created fertile soil. When the farmers moved in and brought slaves, they farmed that specific area. When slavery ended, those areas became dominated by Democrat-leaning black communities who are now heavily Democrat. And they show you the correlation between ancient coastlines and how it affects modern voting today.
Yes.
Another really great story, which I'm sure you're aware of, is the distance of the train tracks and how it's based on the Roman chariots.
Yes. This stuff is everywhere. The universe is infinitely connected and everything's connected to itself. Back in the 1600s, they were able to look at sunspot activity and correlate it with temperature levels. And the 1600s was a very cold society. And so they knew, even in the 1600s, that their political issues were correlated with these variations in sunspots because they knew the weather got colder and that caused them political issues.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So let's bring it back to the most immediate surface level stuff. We have an election in 21 days.
Yeah.
They say already we don't know who's going to win on the election day. We're planning actually multiple nights of live stream coverage because it is not likely that we're going to have any results. So we're going to be doing live special election coverage probably for days.
Yeah.
We have the safe harbor deadline in December. We have the electoral vote count January 6th. Do you have any guess as to what kicks off a political conflict in this time period? Is it going to be January 6th where Democrats refuse to certify? Is it going to be Trump wins, but then riots erupt across the country?
I operate in certain probabilistic ranges where if you're looking at something over a certain time frame, a group of people, you can make a genuine probabilistic bet. So I have an 80% probability the right wins. When you operate in frames like that,
But you're saying 80% chance that Trump wins the election?
oh, so I think he's going to win the election. I also, that's not what I was saying. I think if there's a civil war, 80% chance the right wins. And so I'm comfortable saying that with a frame like a 1 month period, you're operating on a scale of size that's too dependent on individual variables.
Yeah.
And I think neither side is going to accept the results of the election. And the thing is, they don't have to convince the other side. They just have to give their own side enough plausible deniability. And so I think we would end up with, let's say, an American people's government based out of Washington, D.C., and an American patriots government based out of Austin. And so,
wow.
if you want to look at English Civil War, French Revolution,
It is the right city.
yeah, English Civil War, French Revolution, American Civil War, English Civil War, French Revolution. Each of them, both factions claim to be the one true government, and the other faction were the enemies of the real government. And so what would happen is that, let's say, electoral issue, and I think there's going to be a lot of cheating this election because there's no incentive to not cheat,
right? Because
people have disputed the last two elections, and
Democrats have disputed every election they've lost going back, I think, 40, 50 years.
So there's
but now it's come to 2016 was stolen by the Russians, 2020 was stolen by Biden.
Yes. And so you have complete validity in saying that this election isn't fair. And so that gives you complete legal plausible deniability. And so the right could say the left was falsifying the elections. The left can say the right is a threat to democracy. Both of them could have their supporters behind them. Then they have independent governments, and then they basically conscript young men. This isn't going to be the end of society. It wouldn't be a nuclear holocaust. It would be like one of those wars you see in a country you don't want to travel to. Like if you look at Ethiopia, where the Tigray and the Amhara are having a civil war, and it just happened, and then they conscripted men of those ethnicities. You look at a variety of countries around the world, and these sorts of civil wars are very normal. And the sad thing is that an African saying that goes, "When the elephants fight, the grass loses."
Oh, wow.
Because when these great political conflicts happen, I'm from one of the most politically contentious parts of the country. I'm from outside Philadelphia. My hometown is one of the most electorally important places. And so I know that places like my hometown would get screwed over in a civil war. And that's the downstream effects of this sort of thing.
Austin, you think, will be the people's or the
American Patriots government, because Texas is the only state you could put a conservative capital in because it's in the middle of the map. It has the industrial base.
But Austin is...
The pre-established government of Texas is in Austin. So if you run a government, you need to have the human capital. Austin's government human capital is pre-established in Austin. Austin, it has no defensible borders. It's surrounded by highways. It has a big conservative intellectual group there. The left could not defend Austin, and Texas has the biggest National Guard in the country. So they could just steamroll Austin overnight and establish it as a conservative base.
And then you have, you said the right would win in the end. And I think that's true just because urban centers are where the liberals are, and urban centers can be choked out by a couple blockades.
Yes, it's a variety of things. The biggest variable I would look at here is the military tilts these conflicts, and the military tilts right, and that's probably more pronounced over the last few years. Young men tilt right.
Sorry. The theory is the reason why the military has been going drag queen woke is because they're trying to purge out more conservative-leaning members.
Yes. It's like the Spanish Civil War, where in the Spanish Civil War, the military tilted right, and then the elected leftist government was trying to purge the military, the top brass of the military. But if you want to look at the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, what happened is that the top brass were political appointments, while most of the military were sympathetic to the rebels. And then when push came to shove, the men sided with their colonels and their sergeants, not with the generals and the admirals.
Wow. I wonder, for those that are listening that served, if you believe either you or others would choose to go with their immediate chain of command, the people you know, or the generals. Because I got a feeling a lot of people are going to be like, when you're looking at leadership like Milley and he's giving and he's the one who's giving orders, and then you got your buddies, the people you know
Yeah.
and trust and have led you well. But I don't know. I haven't served, so I wouldn't know.
Yes. Having the military mutiny and go for the non-ruling class, you see it in a lot of these revolutions. It's the determinant variable. But besides it, young men tilt right as a demographic. Besides that, gun owners tilt right. The right has the manufacturing, it has the electricity, it has the food, it has a geographically coherent territory. And then the left is a bunch of city-states. And even on the east or the west coasts, you could cut off Philly from DC, from New York. The left also is just so delusional, and the left thinks hunting is immoral, let alone killing people. I just read a story.
The left doesn't know the difference between men and women.
Exactly. And I watched this story on Lotus Eaters yesterday about there was this Danish ship off Nigeria, and the Danes, they were attacked by a one-legged pirate. And then after beating the pirate, they sent him back in a boat with enough food to make it because they couldn't legally determine what nationality the pirate was. And I thought, this is insane. In no other era of history are you attacked by a pirate and you treat it like a bird that got lost in your house.
How about this? Venezuelan gangs have taken over several apartment complexes in Aurora. The media lied, said it wasn't
Yes.
happening. Now they admit it's happening, but they say it's only a handful.
Yes.
In what historical period, and I'm sure there is one,
Yes.
would a nation allow a foreign group of violent attackers to seize its territory in any capacity?
Yes.
I have to imagine the references you'd bring up would be the fall and declination of a society. Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.